Hi, this is Vinay Dabholkar. I work as a consultant, teacher, and author in three areas: innovation strategy, design thinking, and mindfulness. The following video is a recording of an online webinar I delivered on May 15th, 2020 during the COVID pandemic lockdown period. The topic is improving idea velocity, and it is based on a part of the book 8 Steps to Innovation, Going from Jugaad to Excellence, which I co authored with Professor Rishikesh T. Krishnan. Set some context, we can bring those ideas as we discuss. So, this first news is from this company, which is Cabin Care, which is headquartered in Chennai. And this news mentions that Cabin Care launches sanitizer sachets. Cabin Care is actually known for its sachets. They introduced sachets, I think, for the first time in India. Now they introduced this sanitizer sachets, and actually quite quickly. Would we say that that's an innovation? Um, let me just pause here for you to also ponder and see. Let me also just see if I can have the chat window. Okay. Um, okay, chat. All right. Now I'm able to see the chat. Okay. So um, the answer is actually yes, it is an innovation. They actually launched it pretty fast in the market, and they started selling it. Now let's move to the second example. This comes from the college ITI, we all know. And this is ITI principal from Behrampur in Orissa. His name is Rajat Panigrahi. And he turned microwave oven into a sterilization unit. We know that sterilization unit is quite relevant in the current context. As you can see, there is a mobile phone and a pen perhaps getting sterilized there. Would we say this is also an innovation? So, yeah, okay, many of you are saying, some of you are saying no, some of you are saying yes. So this I would call potential innovation, because this is an idea which can perhaps um, give rise to a product which can be in the market, but it's not yet in the market. That's what the news said. He actually has sent his idea, and of course, along with maybe the demo to ICMR, and there's going to be a scrutiny, but a product like this will have safety concerns associated with it, and many other um, things as well. So unless all these things are sorted out, it's really not in the market where a customer can go and buy it. So until that happens, we will consider it as a potential innovation and not yet an innovation. Now let's look at the third example. This is from Tihar jail, and it said that the meals by Tihar inmates feed the hungry, which we can see here. Would we say this is on an innovation as well? That they started within actually a couple of days of lockdown, they started taking their leftovers, which means there are about 40, 50 meals which get left over every day. It's a large prison. And they went out within 5 kilometers of the radius of Tihar jail. And this is, there's a queue there. Would we say this is an innovation? I would also say this is a potential innovation, because it's a little better in the sense as compared to the Rajat Panigrahi's idea, because it's actually in the market, but um, it would needs to be tested a few times before, consistently, before we can really call it an innovation. Yeah. Now I think it must have been a number of days. I don't know the latest. So maybe if it is really done every day for the last so many days, maybe a couple of months, then I would actually call this an innovation. Yeah. Now this is a fourth example. And this is from one of the pharmaceutical companies headquartered in Mumbai, Glenmark. And it says that Glenmark begins phase 3 clinical trials of on one of the drugs, favipiravir, for COVID-19 patients. Would we say this is an innovation? And by now you might have guessed that this is also a potential innovation, because now this is especially true for a drug like this, because there are very strict protocols as to how a drug should be tested before it can really be in the market for everybody to consume. Yeah. So as you can see, these are all connected to the broad challenge, which is the same, which is COVID, but each of them have asked different question. And I think that's an important aspect of an innovation, that is same challenge you can look at from different aspects, ask different question and come up with different responses. Now let's add a new lens to this, which we call pipeline velocity and batting average. This is what we call in our book. And as you can see, there's a funnel here with a lot of ideas. Pipeline is what gets into this funnel. Velocity is how fast, at what speed is the idea moving forward in the funnel. And batting average borrows from cricketing analogy to say that you need singles, which means you need small ideas, and you need sixers, which are really big impact ideas, and fours and all that. But on an average, you should have a good batting average. Of course, the metaphor has limitation, in the sense, in cricket, the maximum score a ball scores is 6. But in a business or even in a social context, the impact of your idea or a revenue that an idea can generate can be like 1,000 runs also, right? So if we were to use the cricketing analogy, sometimes a ball can score 1,000 runs. So in that sense, this is a very it's a non-linear game. And what we are going to assume for this session is that you have some idea, or you can generate some ideas. That means you have some pipeline, and you want to really improve idea velocity, which means the speed at which idea can move forward. I think that's the question which is getting asked for many of the ideas, because there's a lot of urgency today, whether it's a drug or whether it's something else. Can this be really be available soon? That's the kind of question we are asking. So this is the question. And in fact, in the last 10 years, when I worked with companies and various organizations, one of the central challenges of innovation or systematic innovation is, I would say, idea velocity. Because people have ideas, or if you ask people, they will give you ideas. And we can see that even today. Every day, the paper will tell us so many ideas that people are coming up with. It's the velocity that matters really, because either you can get tired, you're not getting funding, you're not getting support and all that. So that's the kind of question we'll focus today primarily. Let's look at the last 4 ideas through this lens, which is pipeline, velocity, and batting average. Now, I'm going to, for the time being, ignore the last column, because we really don't have information as to how much money the sachets have generated, and the impact created by Tihar jails, food, and so on. So we'll for now just we say we don't know this last column, but there is some information we know of the first pipeline and the second velocity. Let's see what we know. This is just all from the newspapers. Now, what Kevin Care is saying is that they actually have 300 plus readily available ideas in the R&D, which means they have ideas in the pipeline, they have done prototyping, but they have not taken them out, because you can't market everything. So you always have limited resources, as well as you look at the market readiness. So they said this sanitizers, the sachet idea of sanitizers was already available in their R&D, which means they had done the basic testing already done. And what was the velocity for them? 15 days from decision to billing, which means it took them just 15 days once somebody took a decision at a high level, I'm assuming, that let's get this out in the market. It's a very much a need. And I would say that's really, really fast for a manufacturing company. I mean, exact details as to how they reuse their manufacturing lines is of course not mentioned. But I think it's a very good velocity indicator that once they just decided, within 15 days, they actually had built a customer. Now let's look at the second example, which is this principle from ITI. He mentioned he experimented with various options as to what he can use for this sterilization, which means he had multiple ideas. Exact ideas did not, it was not mentioned in the article, but there were many ideas. And again, exact velocity was not mentioned, but I'm assuming based on when the news appeared, it could be a few days to a maximum a month. It's more likely to be maybe a couple of weeks that he got his prototype ready with a used microwave oven. Tihar jail's pipeline is not really mentioned as to, but Tihar jail, by the way, I have been tracking Tihar jail for the last 10 years. It is really, really, it has got excellent pipeline. Tihar's revenue from the products manufactured in the jail is 30 crores plus. It's got, the people who are graduating inmates actually get placed. There are campus placements, people writing IAS and MBA exams. Last year, I think, or 2 years back, there was a fashion design center there where people from the inmates designed dresses which was used in the ramps. So, I mean, there are all kinds of ideas that Tihar jail has. But the velocity was quite impressive. Within 2 days after lockdown, they had done their first pilot. Now we have to understand that Tihar jail operates under extremely stringent regulatory processes, right? I mean, you can't just get things out of jail that fast. But even within those constraints, I think within 2 days, they actually had the meals out for people to consume. Now, pharmaceutical companies, those, especially those who are in the new drug discovery game, they actually have on their site their pipeline published. So if you go to Glenmark's website today, Glenmark will actually show that there are 6 drugs that are in the pipeline and in various phases of its life cycle. Okay, so that's part of any pharmaceutical company which is innovating. Now, what the article mentioned about velocity is that it's going to take 28 days for this drug to get tested in a very, very systematic manner. The drug was already launched in Japanese market. So in that sense, it's not really a fresh, completely new drug. But even within the Indian context, it has to follow certain protocols. So that gives us some idea as to what is the kind of velocity we are talking about. Now, let's come to our question. How do we really improve idea velocity? Okay. Now I'm going to look at 3 levers of idea velocity. The first lever is, I would say, the dominant lever, the most critical lever that you can have you can do something about, and that's the speed of experimentation. The second lever is speed of idea selection. And the third lever is speed of finding a champion. And we'll go into each of them one by one. So let's look at the first lever, which is speed of experimentation. Now let me look at this. Let's begin with these 2 quotes, which are probably mentioned more than 100 years apart. Edison's quote says that the real measure of success is the number of experiments that can be crowded into 24 hours. This could be any time between 1880s to maybe 1900. And Jeff Bezos's quote is from 2016 shareholders letter to shareholders. Our success at Amazon is a function of how many experiments we do per year, per month, per week, per day. And Amazon, by the way, may be doing easily more than 20, 30,000 experiments a year, easily. It can be doing maybe thousands experiments per day. That may be the kind of velocity that Amazon runs today. And we'll look at as to what do they do. But let's ask a question: why experiment? Anything which is any idea that you want to bring out, there are uncertainties which the idea carries. Otherwise, you wouldn't call it idea. Otherwise, there won't be anything novel there. So an idea carries a need risk. In this specific case, Tihar jail's case, are there people who are willing to eat jail food? I mean, of course, people would be hungry, and they may be interested in food, but would they be willing to eat food made in the jail? Who knows? So there's a risk there. We don't know yet. There's a feasibility risk. Is it doable? That is, there may be so many constraints, not just within the Tihar jail, but also the lockdown constraints, which is, can people maintain their social distance and all that? With quality, can we deliver these? Because Tihar's first will finish or serve the meal to all the inmates. The leftovers is what goes out, and 11:45 or 12 is when their lunch will finish. When it finishes, can we have quickly get the food out? So is it doable? Third risk is called scale risk, which means if the idea works, can we really scale it with quality? I mean, in this case, the scale will be limited, but let's say, can we go to 5 different places, right? Um, and finally, there is a financial risk, which means, can we sustain this? Now, some companies like Cabin Care would be for-profit companies, so they would say, can we make profit? But a school or college would ask a slightly different question, or any NGO would ask a different question. For example, there are some participants here who are from an educational NGO, which is Agastya International Foundation. Now they will say, okay, can the impact, is this the budget, everything? So everything will have some cost angle, and will it really fit in there? The kind of money that you put in and the kind of impact that it makes. So these are the, broadly 4 types of risks which you need to really ensure that the idea works. Now, one ways we experiment is turn the risks into hypothesis. This is simple. You say, okay, there are people who are willing to eat jail food. Let's make this assumption. There, it is doable for us. Let's make this assumption. We can scale it with quality, and we can sustain it. And experimentation would really mean testing these hypotheses. Yeah. So experimentation is hypothesis testing. And what kind of experiments? One of the things which we suggest is low cost, high speed experiments. That is, you don't want to put lots of money into these experimentation, because, if it turns out to be that idea doesn't work, then we don't lose much. And the high speed, because the sooner we learn, the better for us, because we are going to fail quite often. So that's why it's called low cost and high speed. Now, this experimentation is an iterative process. What it means is, so need and feasibility, if you're testing, sometimes you do this iteratively for 10 times, sometimes 100 times, and sometimes, like an electric bulb, Edison would have done it for more than 5,000 times. You're just testing different, Edison was just testing different materials for the bulb. And he used to number his experiments from 1 to 5,000, and after 5,000 he would repeat the number again start from 1. And sometimes it runs into thousands, but sometimes it could be just a matter of 10 times. But at some point you get enough confidence to say that, look, I think this idea can actually now become a proper project. I can invest more. You find somebody who funds the idea, and that is when it moves to the demo to impact loop. I call the first idea to demo loop, and the second demo to impact or demo to cash loop sometimes, where you're really testing the scalability and the viability. And even here it can last quite a long. So just to give you some idea, Tata Steel as an idea was in the first loop for 17 years. Jamshedji Tata first did the experiment in 1880, and 1897 is when he proposed the idea to Lord Curzon the day after he came to Bombay. And the second loop was 11 years. So sometimes these loops can be really, really long. But something like a Facebook would be there in the first loop for maybe 3 months, and second loop for maybe 2 or 3 months. So sometimes your ideas can really have run forward faster. Sometimes it's much longer. Now you might ask, okay, what kinds of experiments we can do? And there are these two types broadly, and actually the first type is um, questionable as an experiment, but that's what most of the time we do, which is trial and error. And the second type is sometimes called controlled experiment. What is a trial and error? Trial and error is where uh, Tihar jail might say, okay, let's take this out to this particular location. Let's do these arrangements and let's see if it works. Let's see if we can actually bring the food out within so much time, maintaining the hygiene and quality and so on. And let's see if we can have the people maintain social distance. So that's trial and error. Now, a controlled experiment has far more rigid things. You have to have one variable which is independent, and you have to have one variable which is dependent. Now, in this case, for example, what Glenmark mentions is that there are going to be 150 people who are actually going to be tested, who are either mild or moderately they being COVID-19, and they would do that. They'll randomly select such people. So these are usually randomized trials. You randomly select people, and then you give them. Now they have not mentioned, but usually you will have a control group, and you will have a treatment group. So control group will not get the treatment, no vaccine, and the treatment group will get the treatment. So these are called, and then you see the result after a few days. So in this case, it was 14 days of treatment, and you'll see the result. Only when there is a statistically significant difference in the two cases, that's when you would say the efficacy of the drug is actually good enough, right? So there will be some stringent criterias or protocols uh, that would have been defined. But we could also borrow this and ask this question. Let's say Tihar jail plans to do a controlled experiment. What could it do? One thing it could decide is the place. It'll say, okay, let's say there are these two places which we can go to. Which place works better? Both are within 5 kilometer radius. So that would be a controlled experiment. You decide one set of people go to one place, another set of people go to another place at the same time with same kind of advertisement and all that, and see which one works better. And there could be other parameters also that, for example, the nature of advertisement. Should we be advertising primarily through only WhatsApp or through other means? That could be a variable. So once you identify variable and then randomly select things, you could do controlled experiment there as well. Now here is one controlled experiment which happened from Microsoft's Bing search engine. And it was a very simple thing that this get same day flowers kind of information, they just brought up next to that click, the link where you click. And it was done as a controlled experiment. You can see a control group. This was a control group. This is a default search engine output. And the second one was the new one. And at random, they would pick some maybe 100 or 200 or 500 people where this result comes, and randomly users will get the second result. And now they will see which one where gets more clicks. And it turned out that the second one, the new one, got many more clicks. I think some 12% more clicks than the first one. That was significantly higher considering the number of users. and then that gave a significant revenue to Bing. So this is how controlled experiments can happen, especially in a online environment. And this is sometimes called A/B testing. A for the first one, control group, and the B for treatment. But it's also doable in many cases where you have scale. You know, I think place like Agastya, which works across like 1920 states of India in all kinds of different schools. It's possible to do these kind of experiments at different scale as well. So this is we looked at so far the first lever, which was um, the speed of experimentation. Let's look at the second lever, which is speed of idea selection. Um, First rule of idea selection is actually don't try to select ideas. Then you might say, how do you really go ahead? Well, you say, let experiment be the judge, which means you just do lots of experiments. Whichever ideas show promising results, let them go ahead. So this is one way to look at it, which means you don't try to actually do the judging. I mean, why judge where you don't know the information? Because our experience can be actually counterproductive sometimes. So that's one rule that sometimes is applied. The second rule of idea selection is, let's say you say, look, I have done these experiments, but I still want to select some ideas. So the second rule says that be generous first. Don't try to make just one idea. Select a bunch of them and be ruthless later. So don't try to be ruthless and be only selective about one idea first. Yeah. So that's the second rule of idea selection. The third rule of idea selection is a little more when you really want to decide about the investment, and sometimes called real win and worth it criteria, which is you ask these questions: is this product or service real? Which means, can you demo this to me? Is the market real? Have you got any input from the market? Can we win this? Which means there is always an alternative. I mean, even in case of Tihar, people will always have choice of going somewhere else for their meal. So do we have some advantage where people come to me rather than going somewhere else? So this is the winning. Can our product or service win? Can our company win? And finally, is the investment worth it, and so on, right? So this is another kind of questions that are asked. So this is the more important point is that the faster you do idea selection, the better. If it is really a hierarchical structure, it's going to take long time for idea to be selected. um, People are not going to give ideas first, and it's really going to be not sustaining. Now let's look at the last lever, which is speed of finding a champion. Now champion in this case is really somebody who can fund, somebody who could be a customer. Who might fund a Rajat Panigrahi? Let's ask this question. Let's say someone higher up in the ITI. ITI is a very, very large organization in India, right? So maybe there is somebody up there who has some funds for such ideas. Maybe they may fund. ICMR might fund. Some private investor might fund. A private firm intending to sell the products might fund. But there's also a very high probability that Rajat Panigrahi does not get any funding, right? So all these are possibilities. But these guys are potentially champions, and for Rajat Panigrahi, getting funding would be very, very important to go to the next level of his idea, because it's going to cost him money. So he may not have his money from his pocket, and even if he has, putting would be very, very risky for him. So for him, it would be important to really get somebody to fund him. So the first rule of championing is that an idea either finds a champion or dies. Now, of course, this is not true for small ideas, but an idea like this idea, Rajat Panigrahi's idea, either this idea finds a champion or dies. Or, I mean, dies is a strong word. Maybe gets parked. Maybe it can get. Its idea is like a virus. Actually, it can remain dormant for like 1,000 years. 1,000 years is a long time, but maybe easily 100 years. Now, this could also happen, by the way, that ITI, Rajat Panigrahi does not get funding for his idea, but somebody in ITI notices that he has done some good work, and ITI Behrampur gets a lab.
Now more ideas come from the lab, not this year, but maybe next year or year after that. And a future idea gets productized. So the point is, your idea not getting funded right now does not mean that it's a failure necessarily. Rajat got his idea got promoted in newspapers in India. I think that itself is a big deal, and that can help he and or the institute more funding. One of the news which was there in the papers 2 3 years back was a school teacher in one of the coastal districts in Karnataka. He saved some 3,000 rupees every month and got his school repainted as a train. And that idea got attracted, and a lot of alumni came and they contributed money, and from which they built toilets, and which attracted more girl students and so on, right? So an idea is a very tricky thing. While your this particular idea may not get funding, it may lead to further funding. The second rule of championing is reverse the process. You start with the champion, which means you approach people who are potentially the champions and tell them, by the way, do you have any problem that you want to solve, that you don't have resources to? And get the problem statement from them. And that's actually another trick that you can do, because then you are increasing the probability of getting funding, because now the problem statement came from them, so they would be having little more stake in actually what you're doing. So that's another way you can try. Now here is an interesting story from this book called Creative Selection. This Ken Kosienda is a guy who is considered father of this autocorrect feature from iPhone, and now the phone that you're using would also have autocorrect. Now what happened was, he was working as a developer on this autocorrect feature, and for the first time they were trying to actually get this gorilla glass, where you touch your finger and 2 3 buttons would get pressed. And autocorrect was not there yet, and they were really not getting what kind of keyboard they should use. They were all puzzled. At one point it became so critical to the project that his manager called all of them, and they said, in the corridor, from now on, all of you are keyboard engineers, which means all of you stop your work and everybody just starts showing keyboard prototypes. So from that day onwards, everybody started showing every day different types of keyboards that can work on a touch screen glass. And Kane's idea was finally picked up, where he had what was a precursor of autocorrect function, and eventually he worked on it and so on. But this is a very very important lesson here. When you decide that a problem is really critical, first you can actually allocate a lot of emphasis or priority to that. You saying, I'm going to keep, if every day I work on 10 things, if this is an important thing for me, then I would keep 7 things aside. I would do only 3 things, or maybe just one thing, which is this, right? Sometimes that focus makes a big difference. And in one particular format in which this focus gets emphasized is called hackathon, popularized in the software industry, which means you get a bunch of people in one room and say, okay, let's one day, half day, or even 2 days, bring your sleeping bag. Let's all develop demos for this problem. I think that's a good way to bring focus to idea velocity, which is you're really experimenting, collaborating, talking to each other, and working things out. Okay, so this is I thought something worth trying. The second story that he mentions was when he was working on the iPad keyboard. Now this is the next project. He had worked on iPhone, and he was working on iPad. He had two options. One suggested by his friend Bas. It had more keys. Each key is bigger. Each key is smaller, rather, almost like a full-size keyboard. And second one, where each key is bigger, the one which is below. And he was not sure, but his manager liked these ideas. So his demo was scheduled to be given to Steve Jobs within. He developed this, by the way, in 2 days. So these ideas took him 2 days to develop. The keyboard was actually not working. Only thing that was working is you press the key and you get a feel that it's working. Nothing is actually working. Yeah, so it's a demo. So he went to Steve Jobs, and Steve Jobs didn't ask any questions. He just looked at this, played around with this for some time, maybe 5 minutes, and just asked one question. We need only one of these, right? Which one? He expected this, that Ken would have actually worked or played around with both these keyboards for some time, and he would have an informed um, suggestion to give. And that's what happened. He proposed that the bigger keys idea works better, and that's what he went ahead. But this again points to a very important lesson for especially people who are at higher positions. We have principals here and senior managers and so on, group leaders, team leaders. At a regular basis, it may be worthwhile that you actually look at demos by people, experiments that people have done. Your job is to actually just look at what people have done, and then see if this idea can be taken forward or not. I think it's an important way of championing something, right? Can you champion ideas? And that's a lesson here. Now, last few minutes I want to spend on this question: what's the key hindrance to improving idea velocity? And the key hindrance is called fear of failure. And I want to use this book, which is one of my favorite books, from this guy who is a cartoonist. He does Dilbert cartoons. You can Google and check. And this book that he wrote, Scott Adams, is called How to Fail at Almost Everything and Still Win Big. And he mentions that you want to be steeped to your eyebrows in failures, because the second part is very important, because failure is where success likes to hide in plain sight. If you really want something to succeed, you need to be ready to really fail bunch of times, lot of number of times. Yeah. So this is the first time I encountered this was more than 10 years ago when I read this book called Game Changer. It was written by, that time he was a CEO, Lafley, of Procter and Gamble, big company, and one page was full of just AG Lafley's 11 biggest innovation failures. And he had these 3 columns: the brand, what's the idea, what was the in-market experience, and key learning. This was an important thing. It is like a school principal or a CEO of a company or a business leader publishing his failures. And this is called failure resume. By the way, so now that I teach at IIM Bangalore, and many times in my classes, I present my failure resume. And first time a student told me that, sir, we want to see your failure resume. These days, it's, if you're innovating, you should be having failure resume. I did not have a failure resume. Next day, I prepared one and took to the class and showed my failure resume. So now every time I teach, I show that. Now I maintain an experimentation diary. Now this is not the actual picture of my diary, but it is, I've copied my entries here. All the entries are from my diary. Maybe on the video I can show you, but so I maintain an experimentation diary, and I perform huge number of experiments, and many of them are failures, and they keep failing. So this is one suggestion I have: you can maintain an experimentation diary. And some of the experiments I have not done. For example, I want to get to sewing. My mom does sewing, and wife also does to a lesser extent. But I want to stitch my things, so I want to make a bag and all that. So I have not done that. But there are many others. Zoom webinar was actually an experiment. This is the second experiment of Zoom. So really, we looked at these 3 levers of idea velocity: speed of experimentation, speed of idea selection, and speed of championing. And we also looked at experimentation diary and failure resume. Okay, so now let me go to the chat window, and let me see if there are any questions that you have. Okay, so let's see if you have any questions. Let's discuss for the next 15 minutes questions that you have. You can type them on the chat window.
You can also unmute yourself and ask questions.
Yeah, that's also another way you can do. Anybody?
ಚೆನ್ನಾಗಿರುತ್ತೆ ನಾನು ನೋಡೋಕೆ.
This is Ajay.
Yeah, Ajit, please.
Yeah, can we?
One second, I'll just.
Okay. Yes.
Ajit is asking something here. Ajit, you can speak.
Yeah, so can we write in the process itself? Can we program failure so that so the other side of failure is success. So we program both with same intensity, foresee both, and maybe multiple. Is that possible? Something of that sort.
Let me try to understand the question, Ajit. Are you saying when you say program, what do you mean by actually program failure?
So right in the beginning itself, we are going to foresee the project.
Yeah. Yeah. Okay, Ajit, please. Yes.
Yeah. So we are going to foresee the project.
Yeah.
And failure is so important.
Yes.
That part is also important.
Yes.
So is success.
Yes.
So in the current day and time of technology, can we foresee this idea of failure in the process itself?
Yes. So that's what. See, actually, if you look at what Amazon does, I mean, because we took the examples of Amazon, and I think I would say same thing might be true of Glenmark as well. That Amazon, when it does about 1,000 experiments every day, it knows that the success rate of these experiments, which means the criteria which would create sufficient impact, would be definitely less than 10%. So it actually builds in this expectation when it actually does experiment. Of course, what Amazon does, I mean, is that it actually has, Amazon might be using you and me as testers actually, right? Because it's randomly picks some users and changes some button colors and all that, so that we don't even know that we are testing for Amazon. Actually, we are thinking we are buying or browsing Amazon. So in this specific case, they are able to do a lot more experiments because of the technology of this A/B testing. But I would say yes, your question is actually true, that you have to anticipate some failure rate without which you can't do then experiments, right? But the assumption is that even a few successful ideas might actually create impact which could be fairly large over a long run. Yeah. Okay, another question Natesh has asked, I'm just going to read that. How can we make sure students who go through the design thinking process understand the importance of not holding to their first ideas? Okay. Actually, that's a good question. Just to give you some context, Natesh leads a program at Agastya where students go through this innovation process. They are coming from this. This is near Kuppam. Most of the students wouldn't have done this kind of things, so they're doing for the first time, mostly from government schools. So they have a tendency to actually hold on to their first ideas. Now, maybe I'm just thinking aloud. Okay, one way is to actually say that, okay, let's test your idea for first idea. That is, you don't reject the first idea. We say that let experiment decide the result. So let them actually go and say that my first idea is going to work, but you ask from them the result of their experiments, and at least you see that, look, let's at least consider this as an experimentation phase where we will test this idea whether it works. Let's say if it idea really works, then that first idea is fine. But I'm assuming that many times first idea may not really work. That's one way. The other way is you recommend as a process that everybody starts with at least 3 ideas. You say that, look, let's not narrow down, let's not be ruthless upfront. The idea is we are following a principle which is be generous first and ruthless later. So every student has to have 3 ideas they need to test and then select the best idea. Maybe that might at least as a process prompt them. So Shashi has asked this question: can these concepts be applied in a service industry as well, where innovation is often process improvements? I'm assuming why not? I mean, uh, Shashi, so where do you see difficulty really? So process improvements, I mean, let's take either HR process improvement or, finance process improvement. We can tinker with these processes and really perform these experiments, right? We can do pilot projects, and I think they are done a number of places where will this change particular, if I change this process a little bit here, will this really work? So there can be pilot projects where you can test it out, and it's like Ajit said, it is known that this is a testing phase and you're not testing it everybody, right? Maybe there is a control group where randomly selected people are not doing the new process, and some people are this slightly modified process, the randomly selected people are doing the treatment group, and you see which one actually is working better. So but maybe if you have some specific example where you think it may not work, maybe it's possible there may be cases, but yeah, that would also help.
Uh, Vinay, I have a question.
Yeah, Subbu,
Subbu
please.
here. Hey, so, I mean, one of the things which, we are looking at experimentation of selecting a group and doing all of this testing. But sometimes, for our surprise, we always find that there is a demographic or a group of focus group which we have not even considered. But
Yeah.
end of the day, that somehow comes to us as a surprise.
Yes.
So how do we sort of focus on a group? That's something which always bothers me. Okay, we are thinking in a particular line of thought, thinking that this will work for this demographic or people, but it might work very well for another group. So how do
Yes.
we deal with things like that?
Subbu, I think that's a very good question. And I think that brings us to an important aspect of this process, which is being humble, really. I mean, we are experimenting, and sometimes we can take a position that, oh, I know what my hypothesis is and what my idea is. But actually, as you said, my customer is somebody else. And I'm not even focusing on that particular customer group. And my experiment somehow gives me that data point, not maybe in a big way, but in a small way. Hey, these are the people who are responding and you're not even focusing on them. So my assumption is that's where the strength of the process gets tested, where you need to really acknowledge, look, I need to go back and maybe say that I'm asking the wrong question, or I may have to rephrase the question by changing either the customer group or something else which is there in the hypothesis. So that's an important aspect, and a very tricky aspect also. But this is what we would call learning, right? And many, by the way, many drugs in the past history have been discovered like that. I mean, the guy was experimenting something. Actually, post-it also happened like that, right? The guy was actually trying to make a stronger glue, and a weaker glue happened.
Yeah.
And then now he didn't know what to do. So yeah. So is that am I
Yeah. Makes sense. Yeah.
yeah, so that's, you are completely right. I mean, we should be ready to really, if the data is showing something else, I should really go back and really see if I can change it.
Change the question itself.
Yeah. Yeah, Hari has asked a question. How can I decrease experimentation fatigue? Okay. How can we make my experiment design more robust? Okay, so now let's take one question at a time. So let's take first one, which is experimentation fatigue. So actually, that's a good point, in the sense, if you are really working on an idea which is very, very, um, let's say, long shot idea, right? Like going to the guy Elon Musk's idea, right? We are going to go and settle on the Mars. I mean, of course, I will not pick such an idea, but I can also pick an idea which is where failure rate is very, very high, and that can, like he said, can actually demoralize me. I mean, every day I'm just feeling, every day feeling. So one way I would do is I balance my portfolio, which means I will have some ideas which are really not like this long shot idea, which are like smaller ideas, which where the success rate is higher. And that's why I feel it's good to balance between small ideas and big ideas, so that I get motivated by, okay, at least I'm making small. And by the way, small improvements both, first of all, they can accumulate to a lot of impact, and they may suddenly point out to something which may become a big idea, right? So, and hence, on one hand, I would keep doing these small things, and on the other hand, I would keep going on the big idea where my failure rate could be high. So that's one way, at least I know of balancing out. If somebody else knows, please share. And the second part is, how can I make my experiment design more? I think this is where we need to do some planning, which means, okay, what is it that I'm testing here? What is my variable? And have I reduced the noise, for example? I mean, if you go back to the Tihar jail example, see, there can be a lot of noise. There are a lot of variables changing suddenly. So can I change only one thing at a time? At least we can ask that question. That's one way to make the experiment robust. The other is by randomization, which is randomly selecting a few people so that at least the noise gets overall cancelled. Okay, these are the two things I know. There is Jai, one of the my friends. He's also expert in this. Jai, if you know something, please share. Um,
No, I think that's fine. I don't. Yeah.
yeah, good. Okay. Anything else? Okay, Rohit has asked a question. Should there be experimentations day in an organization? Okay. Now, should is a very strong thing. I mean, I feel, something may work in some place and something may not work, but I feel that it helps to have. So one of the days which I have realized, which may be helpful, is you say one Friday a month, let's say last Friday a month, is when we will show prototypes. We will all show prototypes to each other, which means all of you. So Rohit actually is a business owner. He's been running a business for last 25 years. So, and it's a manufacturing business. So you as a business owner could tell all your team members that last Friday of every month, let's all show prototypes and let them be failure. Doesn't matter. Let's see something interesting. So that could be a case. Maybe you could also have some dedicated time, a few hours or something, a month, or you find out where let's just prototype. So in a way, could you do a hackathon, a miniaturized hackathon in your organization, right? Your company. Another way to ask is, could you just select one challenge? Say, look, next 3 months, let us all tackle only one challenge, one problem statement. Let us do experiment because this is an important challenge. Let us do that. So that could be another way to, like it was done in that Apple's iPhone case. Everybody, of course, Apple case was an extreme case where people were not doing anything else. That may not be possible for most organizations. So you say, look, you do your regular work, but let's keep some time where we will tackle this particular challenge. I mean, so I would recommend experimenting. So creating time and space for experimentation is a huge challenge for most organizations, and you need to just figure out what works for your organization. I think that may be useful. Yeah, it could be. I mean that's definitely it could be a good challenge, and I think that experiment is worth trying out, right? Let's just put everything on cloud and let's see how it works. So I think the people could design very good experiments to make an organization paperless. Actually, yes, I would say it's a very good challenge where you invite people to demo different ideas as to how they can make an organization paperless. Very good example. Same thing could be automation, also, right? And many other things as well. I mean, even you're making the place environment friendly, all that. Reducing waste could also be exam challenge. Let's see if there's a last question before we close. Yeah, yeah. Sorry, Rohit, what is, okay, so let's take this Natesh's question. How do you initiate an idea culture? Okay, that's a good question. See, actually, Natesh, my suggestion would be actually more than idea culture, right? If you actually try to build experimentation culture, idea would just come along with it. Because many times, if you just focus on ideas, people just stay with ideas and they don't move forward. So alternately, if you can actually try to build an experimentation culture, that would be automatically bring in ideas. By the way, so that actually reminds me that I need to just show you the last slide, which is where the books that I used, I want to just summarize. And one of them does talk about idea culture. So apart from my book, another book I referred was his book, which is called Experimentation Works by Stefan Thomke, the Harvard guy. It's a recent book, very good book. It's a little expensive, but still worth it if you can. This is a book I mentioned, Ken Kosienda. There's a nice interview of him on YouTube. Actually, Stefan Thomke's interview also there on YouTube. Game Changer, I mentioned Laughly. And finally, this Scott Adams book. So just to mention, you, if you can try some of these books, if you're in organizations, buy them for your library, and that could be very useful. Okay, so let's see. I think if nothing else, we'll close. Um, okay, guys. So I think thank you very much. I think it was a pleasure interacting with all of you, and thanks for joining. I hope it was useful to you. I hope you're able to do some experimentation and some ideas take forward. Yeah, thank you very much.
Thank you, Vinay.